Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first session of our Accelerating Impact cohort sponsored by Gas South. We're so excited to have all of you here. And as we just noted, a few other people will begin to join as we probably as people deliver children to daycare and other kinds of things. But we have a big jam-packed agenda today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to our speakers, Tanya Anderson, who is with Youth Villages, and Matt Piper with Open Hand. And I wanted them to spend just a few seconds just introducing themselves. And I'm going to start with Tanya.
Yes, thank you. Good morning. And I'm so excited to be a part of this panel and just the overall meeting this morning. So I am Tanya Anderson, and I am the Executive Director for Youth Villages, Georgia. Youth Villages is a national organization, nonprofit, where we focus on serving children, families, and young adults, and serving them through mental health, behavioral health, and other therapeutic services. So I have worked in the Tennessee programs, and I am now in Georgia. I've been here in Georgia 13 years, I think. And here in Georgia, we provide residential services for children and adolescents. And then we also do some community-based work, intensive in-home services and independent living services for those in the metro and surrounding counties.
Great. Matt?
Great. Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm Matt Piper, Executive Director of Open Hand. I've been here for about 13 years. Open Hand is a nutrition services company. Our mission is to help people either better manage or prevent chronic disease through the right kind of nutrition. So all the meals that we cook here, and we do about 5,500 a day, are medically tailored. They no preservatives, no canned goods, grade A quality ingredients, and everything is tailored specifically. The menus are tailored specifically to meet the chronic health conditions that people are facing. So many of our clients have cancer, HIV, diabetes, heart disease, renal failure, and other serious illnesses as well. In addition to the meals, we also provide nutrition counseling. So we have registered dietitians who are licensed to provide medical nutrition therapy, which is nutrition counseling that's prescribed by a doctor. It's an intensive intervention, and we really follow people through the trajectory of their illness so that we can help coach them and inspire them to stick to our meal plans. We've been around for about 33 years, and we're poised for a lot of growth.
Wonderful. Well, as you can tell, we've got two amazing leaders and two incredible examples of growth to share with you today. And that's really what all of this whole entire series is. And certainly this is the start around accelerating growth so we can have a bigger impact on our mission. So I'm Karen Beaver. I'm the CEO of the Georgia Center for Nonprofits, and I'll be your facilitator today. And prior to this session, we sent out a couple of case studies and light reading examples that we're going to lightly follow as we move through this session, because they do provide a really interesting framework for thinking about leading growth, which is this session. So you can put all the processes, all the people, everything in place, but the leader at the top has to have a mindset and a framework around how they're going to lead that growth trajectory. And we're using a 5A framework that is laid out in an article from McKinsey Consultant. And they really have these 5A framework, but they're organized around two main concepts: performance and health. And so the 5 A's are aspire, where do we want to go? Assess, how ready are we to go there? Architect, what do we have to do to get there? And then act, how do we manage that journey along the way? And then advance, how do we continue to improve? And so you'll note that the majority of this is really around pre-planning, where do we want to go? How ready are we to go there? And what do we have to do to get there? That's all about the preparation, right? And then it's act, and then it's advance, right? And so often, folks get really enamored with an idea, or even if they've done some planning, they're like ready to go, let's jump into it, let's start going. And they haven't really done the complete work, let's say, around those first three. And we find over my 26 years running Georgia Center for Nonprofits and assessing many, many organizations, large and small, there are a lot of derailers of growth that can really get in your way and make it tougher to sustain or tougher to get around. And you hit these thresholds of growth and it makes it harder to get to the next level. So those five are kind of the framework in which we're going to work today. When we think about those 5 A's, the framework for performance, and then the framework for health, both the 5 A's go with each one. So when we think about performance, that translates into strategic objectives. That's the aspire component, creating a compelling long-term change vision, setting, and note, I didn't say vision, I said change vision, setting sort of midterm aspirations along the path and guarding against biases in the process. Sort of sunk cost biases is an example of that. So being ready, in other words, to change again, or to even jettison what you're doing when you are proved otherwise by data and experience. The second is skill set requirements. That's part of the assess A. So forecasting demand for skills and understanding where you're going to get those, the supply dynamics. I think we're all very familiar with that right now with the talent shortage that is just sort of ever present in the universe. So thinking ahead, understanding what it's going to require to get to kind of the next tranche of growth, and making sure that you've got the talent to do that, and then deciding how to close those gaps. And then what we call a bankable plan, that's part of the architecture, defining the portfolio of initiatives that is going to help you realize your strategic objectives and meet those skill requirements, and then sequencing your actions and allocating resources accordingly. And then ownership model, that's part of the ACT, which is establishing strong governance. Who owns this strategy? That's especially important in nonprofits where we don't literally have owners. But it could be a departmental leader. It could be a cadre of departments, right? So it's not necessarily just the organization. And then deciding how to scale your change initiatives and monitor their progress and adjust. And then lastly, advancing learning infrastructure, creating a learning infrastructure. And that's really about institutionalizing processes. How do you might have a kind of an ad hoc process for data capture or whatever, but it's putting those into sustainable practice so that the organization can share knowledge, constantly improve, and continually learn how to do new things. So that's performance. But we also have these 5 A's for health. And so we can go back through these in the Aspire A, health goals, sort of objectively checking your organization's health and choosing where to be exceptional. And, kind of what I call picking your battles, right? Where are we really going to excel? And putting your resources into what is going to propel both your income, but also your mission too. And then target those areas that need immediate improvement. And then mindset shifts. Thinking about your folks, and are there helping or hindering behaviors that are just entrenched and ingrained in your organization? Because this is really about change. And change is more than just changing a program. It's changing the behaviors of people in those programs, lead those programs, think about those programs. And so we're going to spend some time around underlying mindset drivers and thinking about a from and to mindset shift. And then we have the architecture, right? The influence levers. So we're going to think about role modeling and understanding and conviction and reinforcement, confidence building efforts. around that. And then lastly, kind of just the ACT piece, the generation of energy, mobilizing influencers inside your organization, maybe on your board, making the change personal for them and maintaining high impact, and a lot of communication. So that those are 4 of those. And then the last would be advance. And that's just who is going to lead what inside the organization, prioritizing roles and creating value. And so that's the context we want to explore with some of the decisions that you have made it as a leader and that you're going to make as a leader as you accelerate your growth trajectory and your initiatives that you're here kind of investigating today. So we're going to use 2 amazing examples, as we just heard in our introduction, from Open Hand and Youth Villages, and we have the CEOs of those folks here. So I just want to launch this kind of interview off with a question. Both of you, Tanya and Matt, have orchestrated growth strategies around pretty bold initiatives. And to do that, you had to align and maintain alignment with a lot of different stakeholders, board, senior leadership, staff implementers. Talk to me about how you manage the buy-in from these stakeholders. And I'm going to maybe point to Tanya first.
Yeah, sure. I think you made some really good points. As it relates to focusing on buy-in, what has been instrumental to us, and we kind of say the why behind. So we spend a lot of time when we're looking at opportunities to grow, how we're going to get there, how soon we get there, and we do that with the right cadence for the right outcomes that are sustainable for the children and the young adults and the families that we serve. Is we found it to be very important to be very clear about the why behind. So why are we targeting this population? Why are we targeting this geographical area? Why are we targeting to grow this particular program? And what's the evidence behind it that supports moving in that direction so that we can get the outcomes? So that connecting the why and the evidence to support the why behind. In addition to that, we have found that it's super important to engage those stakeholders in feedback loop. So when we're looking at growing a program in a particular area, and we've done the work with the why behind and the evidence to support the why behind, we really engage in feedback loops, and whether that's with our board members, our staff, the leaders that we're hoping to help us move in that direction, and even those grassroots relationships for those stakeholders. So if we're working with DFAC, so we're working with the Department of Juvenile Justice, how is it that we've engaged them to say, here's what we're hoping to do, does it meet the need, and what's that feedback? Now, I have found when you're asking for feedback, you've got to be open to the good, bad, and indifferent. And so how do we process and analyze that feedback and then share sort of our response to the feedback of those that we solicited from, and be transparent. We've done some good onboarding, some not so well, and feedback from the staff and even from stakeholders is this challenge of being transparent without being passive in some ways. So if we're having struggles, what are those struggles to onboarding the new plan or the new project? How is it that we need other support or a new kind of thought process in how we approach that movement, moving in a different direction? And so with that transparency, giving praise where praise is due if we have done some things that have helped us to move in the right direction, but also not being afraid to give that critical feedback, but do it in a way that it's supportive. Because sometimes it's not the failure of a poor decision or a poor initiative. Sometimes we just didn't take the right processes in terms of putting the right people in places, planning it out, that our analytics consider some of the challenges that may not have surfaced at the time that we were looking at it. So that's typically what we will do, is the why behind and the evidence to support it, the feedback loop internally and externally, being transparent about successes and failures, but always looking for how do we remove the barrier and how do we own those challenges and those failures to move things forward in a better way.
Thank you. That is so important. And I can hear the alignment sort of, it's all about communication, right? And
Yes.
you're talking about different forms of communication, whether it's sort of transparent in the meeting, but also looking at the data and thinking about data transparency and bringing that forward and really thinking about, is this data telling us what we need to know. It's not just accepting it, right? It's really
Mhm.
thinking about what that data is showing. Matt,
Absolutely.
yeah, thank you. Matt, what can you tell us about alignment over at Open Hand?
Yeah, I think when I look back at our history, everybody know about Project Open Hands, warmth and the love that we bring to people because we deliver home delivered meals to people who are ill, right? So that's the food is love part of our mission. But the first big hurdle that we had to really communicate is to help people understand, staff, board members, donors, that we weren't just a traditional home delivered meal organization, that we were really going to be focused on the food as medicine movement, and that our sense of purpose was going to shift a little bit. We wanted people to understand that we're not just addressing hunger. The conversation is bigger than food insecurity. This is about nutrition insecurity. This is about health. This is about the food as medicine movement. And we view our services as a medical intervention. We aspire to when doctors will prescribe our nutrition counseling and our medically tailored meals for people who have cancer or HIV. So that was the first really big hurdle, was trying to leave a little bit of our former brand and move in a direction of, we're not just a social service agency, we are a healthcare agency, and we are going to integrate our services into healthcare. That was a lot of years actually to really get people to understand that. And then there was the hurdle of, well, healthy food costs more money, right? So how are you going to make this sustainable? We had a lot of donors who had a lot of doubt, a lot of foundation saying, this sounds great, but how are you going to sustain this? And we, and that's a valid point, right? Healthy food does cost more, fresh food, grade A quality chicken. But we also said, but we're not going to accept that we just can't do it. So it really was, we had to paint the vision for how this could be done. And it led to the launching of our social enterprise, Good Measure Meals. So we sell healthy meal plans, the same meals that we're serving our Open Hand clients, we sell to the paying public through Good Measure Meals. That's our social enterprise. And that the funds generated from our social enterprise help to make our mission sustainable. So that was a big hurdle to get over too. And then there is the fact that this is a heavy lift. We knew that if we were going to go in the direction of healthcare, we were going to have to advocate for policy change. So that meant meeting with legislators, both up in Washington, D.C. and down at the Capitol, to get them on board with the fact that policy needed to advance, that we needed to invest more in food access programs that are providing healthy food. And that's where research came into play. So partnering with, finding new partners like academia, Emory School of Public Health, Morehouse. We've done research pilots with them so that we can point to the outcome data to validate what it is that, what we're trying to accomplish. And then I think the other mindset shift was helping people to understand what we were really selling. We had to learn how to speak healthcare language. And if we're talking to a managed care CEO or a hospital CEO or CFO, they're not as concerned with the warm and fuzzy, right? They want to know what kind of cost containment are you going to offer me? And at the end of the day, that's what we're really offering healthcare. If you will invest in our nutrition services, then you will save money because your members will be healthier. And that is an ongoing mindset shift, in society, basically. I think we're a lot further than we've been in the last 10 years, but we've still got a tall hill to climb, I'd say. So those are some of the mindsets.
Yeah, so kind of mindset shift in general around kind of just the way the organization kind of was branded in a way, right? So often people think of brand as sort of like a logo or something like that, but it's really about your brand promise and how people are articulating. I think one of the hardest things around that is how donors particularly think of you, because they constantly go back to what they remember you as, a constituent and older board members, and also legacy staff, right? It's how they remember you. I think that mindset piece, and we're going to explore that a little bit more as we move down the 5As, but that is a really tough one, and one that really takes a lot of leadership, I think, to constantly be drawing that line and saying, no, not that, this, and it gets wearing on people. They're like, oh my gosh, here there they go again around that. But I think and really make that turn and leave that legacy behind, not leave the legacy, but have people change the way they think about the new future. It just becomes like an anchor around your ankle, right? As you're trying to, swim as hard as you can. And I think your cost piece, and just sort of saying, it might cost more, but in the end, it's going to do more, and we're going to win with this strategy. Just convincing kind of those naysayers. And then I love your example of the policy piece, because sometimes you have such a barrier in front of you that you've got to change an entire system in order to get your vision done. So that's amazing. And Tanya, I see you nodding your head. It might be nice for just before we move to the next question, just to give a brief introduction of youth villages. Matt kind of did that as he kind of moved through his, but would love to hear a little bit more about what you do, and then thinking maybe there's a little bit of more feedback you can give around this alignment notion.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, Youth Villages is a national organization where we provide mental, behavioral health, and therapeutic services to children, families, and young adults. And as a national organization, we've been around since the 1980s, and we are currently now in 23 states and the District of Columbia. And so it's very similar in terms of Youth Villages started out doing more small residential cottage style work. And I think over time, this progression of how do we help children and families live together successfully in their natural environments and in their communities versus out of the home and congregate care settings, the evolution, I think, really kind of started to take place over the years and throughout the country, where that we didn't really abandon this overall idea of helping children and families live successfully. We just began to do it in different ways. So how is it that we still understand the importance of residential congregate care, but put measures and services in place where we can use that level of care to stabilize children who are significantly unsafe and have significant mental health issues, stabilize them, and then move them back into a home-like setting or into independence. And that's where our intensive in-home program, which our model is called Intercept, and our independent living program, which is called LifeSet, really began to grow. And that was in the 1990s. And at this point, our community-based programs are the largest programs that we offer across the country, whereas residential, which is our starting point, we only offer in 2 states now. One residential campus in Douglasville, Georgia, and then there are several residential programs in Tennessee. So while residential was our starting point, it was the vision of how do we help families and children be more successful and independent without this external means of control, and move the vision in that direction. And certainly even now today, for those that are familiar with, child and adolescent services, there can still be a pretty strong emphasis on residential care, hospital care, and we're constantly having to advocate for more progressive services. How do we use inpatient and residential as short-term stability and really focus on what happens when that young person moves back into the community? How are we supporting their natural systems? And I always say it's really progressing the phrase of it takes a village to raise a child. And so now we are on this side of it takes a village to support the family or the parent who is best to raise their child. And it takes a lot of work to do that, not just in developing those grassroots relationships with community stakeholders who may fund a program such as that, but the advocacy behind it, as Matt mentioned, to unlock the funding streams to make that happen. So things are years ahead and progressive. There's more work to be done because there's still a little bit of a stigma and an underutilization of funding services that may be available to address mental and behavioral health needs of children, which subsequently is supporting the family as well.
Right. So as you were talking, you know, I'm sort of channeling our A's. I'm hearing you talk about models and processes and standardization. And then I can imagine the economics of such a big endeavor, particularly with government funding, where they never quite give you enough for admin and the internal things that you need to actually do to run a business. You've really got to get that efficiency in place. And there has to be a standardized process across, you think 23 states with all the state funding and things, you've really got to get those processes set up. So I can imagine that is a huge a component of the performance part of the 5 A's. I want to ask a follow-up question. You know, there's always more choices than capacity in these efforts. What do you do to guide the choices or focus, you know, provide that focus for the organization, Matt?
Yeah, you know, I think a well-designed strategic plan helps, right? So that if you paint the vision, but then you've got to create the roadmap that says if we're here and we want to be there. That's how you get people rowing in the, you know, all rowing in the same direction. Is a really tight strategic plan. I think probably one of the biggest challenges for us is that we knew this, and I knew this, that this was going to be a long-term battle. You know, this was going to be an uphill battle because 10 years ago, health plans and managed care organizations were not reimbursing our nutrition services as a reimbursable benefit on their plans. So we had to build it with the vision of one day this will happen. One day healthcare is going to start paying for medically tailored meals. So we had to paint the vision, right? And then we had to get healthcare to endorse it. And that was one of the big changes we made in our board of directors is we actively recruited medical doctors and researchers to our board so that they would endorse the vision. And then it was also engaging our staff, key leaders, you know, those gatekeepers. A lot of them are registered dietitians in our case because they're passionate about food as medicine and they love teaching. And so we let them be our best ambassadors internally and externally. We're letting them talk about the mission. And that's helped in terms of getting people to row in the same direction, is engaging the staff, but also constantly pointing to the research. We're fortunate in that we're part of a coalition called the Food is Medicine Coalition. In fact, I'm a charter board member of that coalition. Most of the sites in the coalition are in states that expanded Medicaid, and so did a lot of demonstration projects, multi-year studies, large-scale studies that really underscored the value proposition of medically tailored meals and nutrition counseling. And we've constantly pointing to that research to try and, you know, sway people who might have doubts. And because this is a long-term battle, you know, we've been at this for 10 years now, really trying to position ourselves as the preferred provider of medically tailored meals in Georgia. Staff can get impatient, right? Board members can get impatient. Donors can get impatient because it's taken a while to get to where we're at today. And so that's something that I've had to really coach myself on, is to be adamant and be strong. And when there are doubters, don't let those doubters bring others along, you know, point to the research, but also be true to myself. And there were years that were pretty lean. You know, those were really the tough ones where people go, wow, maybe we're not going to get there because we're having such a lean year. So you've got to be focused, and you've got to have those internal champions to keep the morale going, and so you could keep the momentum going.
And I just want to point something out. I mean, you've been there quite some time, and I think sometimes longevity in a leader really helps with that continuity, but
Yeah.
it's not always possible. And I think that let's pivot back to getting the right people in the right seats, and those right below the leader, really understanding what the vision is, having the right mindset, and really understanding the strategy, and being
Yeah.
leaders in their own right of that strategy is so important. I love the way you described, Matt, getting your board, kind of the board composition, kind of tuned in with those leaders that really understand this as an issue, have seen the repercussions of not having food as medicine, and really are believers in that. It's amazing. And just one of the ways I would say to the participants here that I would coach you to think about a strategy, sort of in light of what Matt just shared with you, is it's a bit like climbing Mount Everest. And if you think about that, you don't just zip up the mountain. There's a tremendous amount of preparation beforehand, getting in shape, getting the right, equipment, but even the right composition of people that you're going to climb that mountain with. They don't just sort of join a group. There's a lot of wrangling around getting that group together. But then there are things called base camps, right? You have to pick the trajectory. You can go up a certain face of the mountain or another face, depending on the time of year. But then there are base camps. And at each base camp, and the purpose for those is that you retool completely. You will have completely different equipment, you know what I mean? And you have folks that bring that with you. And then you then gauge what's going to take to get to the next base camp, and you go there. And I think that's sort of the story of this long-term sort of vision, where it's very hard and there's a lot of change with that. You have to accept that there are base camps, and you have to celebrate the fact that you just got to one, because a lot of people don't. So, if you can kind of get that mindset right, you can lead folks' expectation, because we are a very short-term society, and folks expect, and particularly donors, they give you a year to accomplish, let's eradicate drugs from the face of the planet in a year. So it just does not happen, right? So Tanya, anything to share around choices in terms of focusing your organization around those important choices?
Yeah, and it's lots of similarities to what Matt has mentioned. And I will say, as it relates to choices, there can be many variations of serving children and families. We really start with the analytics. So as Matt mentioned, the research, what's happening in the varying states and counties? What are some of those needs? What does the research and the data tell us about the number of children in foster care and the reason why they're in foster care? What does the research and data and research and data in terms of local and federal, national numbers, what's happening with children and families? And we then take that and we scale it down to the varying states. And we do a lot of outreach to states across the country to basically open the window or the doors of communication to share and say, what are some of your pain points? It's the first question that we ask, and they can let us know what their pain points are in terms of providing, quality services to their constituents and to, their parents and, foster parents. And then we start to scale down the services that already exist in those areas, and whether they're getting the outcomes that they need, and not just the initial outcomes, but what are some of those sustainable outcomes? So with us as an organization, as we're looking at not just what do the numbers tell us in terms of where to, onboard services, but what do our own internal numbers tell us in terms of the effectiveness? So when we talk about efficiency and needs, what are the effectiveness of our programs? And so we look at our own outcome data at 6 months and then 12 months to see if there's been some sustained health and well-being for children and for families, and reduced recidivism. And so starting with the research, and then allowing that to guide our decision on where we need to be and when we need to be there. And then that strategic plan, as Matt has mentioned, we start that strategic plan once we gather the information and we're targeting the right areas. Then we start to look at the talent pool of what already exists internally, not just the tenure, but the true talent, and the evidence of that talent in areas and offices where they already work, and getting those outcomes. And you have to, anytime you're scaling up and you're expanding, there's the internal talent, and then you still got to search for the external talent where you're onboarding, hiring new people, and how do you match that and align that with the programs that you're looking to onboard and expand. And then I think the buy-in and the mindset of even the board, which we've got amazing national and local boards, support those efforts. They may ask the questions of why now, and why here? And we're prepared to respond to that because we've done the homework, we've done the research, we've spoken with the community stakeholder to say, yes, we're making the right decision at the right time in the right areas. And here's how we can, benefit from your support as we're moving in the right direction. We tend to do 5-year strategic plans as an organization, and anything we do in local states directly aligns with sort of the national strategic plan. But there has to be the evidence of how local states are moving the needle, and there's direct alignment with that national 5-year plan. And there's lots of synergy in terms of the things that we focus on nationally and locally. So that's been a part of our process, and it's pretty darn effective. And there are lots of meetings and checkpoints to, again, just reassess and either reassure us or refute the fact that we've made the right choices at the right time, and then how do we pivot to be more effective?
Right. Well, thanks for that. And, both of you have sort of alluded kind of helps me with the segue into the next one, which is really kind of the assess portion of this. And the assess really focuses on skill set and mindset, right? And this is such an important, I think, factor in change initiatives and scale initiatives. It's really to think critically about hidden barriers, and usually they're embedded in behaviors and beliefs, right? Historic ways of doing things in an organization that that hinder progress and need to be removed. And we've all heard kind of responses in leadership team meetings like, well, we tried that and it didn't work, or well, we used to do it this way and I really liked it that way and it was easier that way, or whatever, whatever the thing was, right? Mindsets, skill sets, behaviors and beliefs. And, I think one of the biggest hindrances around scale, and it may not be evident right away, but it becomes evident, pitifully in kind of the rearview mirror, is we take legacy people that we feel like deserve kind of progress, and we plug them into these roles because there is a role, right? And it's an advancement role, and it doesn't work because of a skill set or because of a belief or a mindset, if you will. It just doesn't support the new machine. And so it's a very painful thing, but a very common thing. So I think working on those, I wonder if y'all have an example of just sort of recognizing those kinds of mindset shifts that need to happen, or actively working on a mindset shift. If you have an example of where you saw that and kind of addressed it, or maybe where something just didn't work, I think that would be very helpful.
I can share, Karen, an example. To scale up Open Hand, we really have had to become a much more efficient operation than we were previously, especially in our early days. And to your point, Karen, it needed different talent. And we had some legacy employees who were beloved by volunteers, beloved by staff, beloved by me, because they've been there forever. And when Open Hand was a very simple operation, they could run the kitchen, actually. Well, as we became a much more sophisticated, highly regulated food plant, still volunteer centric, it required different talent, and it required saying goodbye to some folks. And that was hard, really hard. And I'll say that I don't give myself high marks for doing it quick enough, right? Like, it's usually, I should have done this a year ago, or I should have done this 2 years ago, right?
Right.
So that's a pitfall to beware of. But yeah, and even words like efficiency, sometimes the staff get tired of hearing the word efficiency, right? Because it's hard. You know, we have completely overhauled our food service operations. And we did that with a lot of help from Bridgespan, actually, and also the Georgia Tech Innovation Institute that supports manufacturing companies. So sort of evolving from a grassroots community-based kitchen to a sophisticated food plant, you know, a manufacturing facility, but still maintaining our community-based brand. And has been a tough balance, but an absolutely necessary one if we're going to scale up, and we are going to scale up, and we are scaling. So maybe that's an example that's helpful.
Yes, it really is. And Tanya, do you have an example?
Yeah, I was going to share probably one of the continuing evolution of, I think, just sort of the shift in, which also relates to buy-in, is there are so many young people right now with some significant mental and behavioral health issues. And I think we have seen that on the rise in the last 2 to 3 years. To the point where we're doing some new construction because we just can't transition enough kids out to bring new kids in to be able to provide services for them. And so one of the shifts that we have really had to make, and we continue to do so, are the types of young people that we can serve in our residential program. Yes, we've done significantly well with those that have some general psychiatric challenges, but there are so many more that are not served that need to be served. Lots of examples of pregnant teens who have nowhere to go, that from time to time may be in hotels. We have a lot of young people that have they're medically complex, but their mental health issues supersede their medical complexities. And so we really have had, and there have been some transitions of staff, but I think it's been more of transition of how the staff members have thought about their ability, and they needed to be empowered to know that we could serve complex and challenging children just as much as we could those who are moderately challenged. And what we have found in that transition of moving those out who just wanted to stay status quo and stagnant to those that were more progressive and have a passion of serving diverse, difficult needs are those success stories. So when you have those difficult cases of children coming in, and they definitely give us a run for our money, but when you look at the progress and the stability at 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, and how they're transitioning back into a foster home or into natural family environments, the reward of the staff and the success of the staff and their empowerment to see that they can do something different that was outside of the norm. They just needed some additional coaching, additional training, and support systems has been really, really effective for me. So I agree with Matt, like transitioning some out that struggled and didn't align. We're really empowering those who have the heart. They just didn't have, I think, the skills and the training to progress even more into doing something different that seemed difficult in the beginning.
Right. So important to assess the whole way along. I have a kind of another question, which is there anything specifically that you do with your staff to help them think outside the box? Matt, you talked about efficiency, and you're not able to sort of see into every nook and cranny, as your operation scales, and you've got to have, all of these eyes and ears really, if they are aligned, they need to be looking for those opportunities. Is there anything that you both are doing with your staff to encourage sort of that out of the box, or let me voice this piece that I think would actually, help take the sand out of this engine, if you will.
Tanya, I'll share this one, Karen and Tanya, the talking about innovation and celebrating innovation as part of our culture, and really rewarding people when they bring a creative idea up front. We do a lot of brainstorming sessions and really try to engage staff at all levels, and then celebrate them if they come up with ideas that that we can implement. Design thinking that Georgia Center for Nonprofits taught us. We've got a couple of folks who are pretty skilled in that, and that's a great way to to sort of build a culture that celebrates innovation. So I think those are some of the things. I think the other thing that we did that really helped us to assess the roadmap of where we needed to go was we worked with a consulting company, Bridgespan, that many may have heard of, for almost 2 years, as we were really identifying what were our needs going to be, both in terms of talent, but also technology. The technology lift to shift and scale up has been a huge investment. I mean, we've invested over the last 10 years easily $2 to $3 million in making not only our food service operations more automated, but all of our databases, and trying to be HIPAA compliant is absolutely key if you're going to work in the healthcare space, right? So the technology piece was huge, and it's an ongoing heavy lift, right? Because you're never done with technology. And so trying to figure out what kind of talent we were going to need, both internally but externally. It took us a while to find the right technology consulting firms that we partner with. There's so many different areas of expertise in technology, right? You could be a developer, you can be an architect, you can be, a software engineer. So trying to figure out what was it that we needed if we were going to scale up. I think those are some examples.
There's so many software companies too that will sell their software. They'll just be everything to everybody, but really they're kind of thing, right? And you don't know until you've invested a ton of money. It's a common problem among nonprofits. So
True.
Yeah, it's so painful.
And a few things that I have experienced when you're thinking about innovation, or if it's, thinking about a new population to serve and how do we serve them well. That feedback loop with staff is so important. So while we can say sort of, here's the vision, here's the timeline, what are your thoughts? How do you think we'll be able to get there? There have been so many people who are eager to have that opportunity to bring ideas to the table and to really show their ability to be what we call transformational leaders. And so I think rewarding those ideas of innovation by simply listening and allowing them to really take the lead in helping to develop the strategy, and giving them the space to actually do that. And having that weekly, monthly, quarterly check-in where they can actually see that their ideas and their thoughts about how to move the needle and to do it with efficiency and with effectiveness is something that they are seeing regularly, I think rewards them in a very different way, which means that they have had a stake in the growth and the progression of the larger organization, in addition to how they have had a hand in the success of the young people that we serve. There is no greater feeling for any of the staff when you have young folks that have graduated from school, that are, coming up and, showing their graduation pictures or sending emails. And they see their efforts and their innovation and their thoughts and their progressiveness and their willingness to serve, which was once a difficult young person in the family, to now how balanced and how healthier that young person or that child may be. So that's how, that's another measurement of their own success and their willingness to think outside of the box, to evolve and to be expansive, and having that type of impact and resiliency for the population that we serve. And it has made a world of a difference. There have been some times when we have really struggled, and a great example is 2 years ago, we struggled significantly with recruiting and retaining nurses for various reasons. And we, I think at a higher level of leadership, would spin our wheels on what do we do to recruit and retain nurses, high quality nurses that have some experience in the psychiatric realm. And I just took time and sat down with our nurses and said, okay, here are the facts in terms of our turnover, leadership and frontline. Here are the facts about the impact to services rendered to children in the program, the ongoing assessments, appointments. This is where like the research and the analytics was very clear about our challenge in serving young people well, because we had retention and recruiting issues in addition to just the other nurses who were here being exhausted. The nurses themselves, I think, from that initial meeting felt very empowered. I didn't lead it, I just facilitated the dialogue among that nursing team. And now we have been able to recruit high quality nurses, the retention is great with our nurses. Wow. But it's because they gave feedback as a team. They were empowered to do that. They had ownership in how we were going to turn the ship around. And everything that I could do and had influence over with the support of our national organization, they were able to see that we really invested in those things. And they are better for it as a team and as a department, but it's because we allowed them the ownership to be able to do that in an effective and efficient way. And to this day, they always express their gratitude for us just listening to them.
Right. I think that's so powerful is, kind of Matt's, suggestion around design thinking is not to start those kind of conversations with we should or we need, but how might we? Right? Mm-hmm. How might we? And, there's another sort of tactic that we sometimes use, which is creating, you can create a strategic board agenda, or you can create a strategic staff agenda where you have one item. How might we retain more of our nursing staff, right? And from the finance folks to the nursing staff, everyone is thinking about that problem. And they're bringing their solutions in from their corner of the room. And I think, from that, you get a more robust solution that is more sustainable. You get a lot of, dialogue and a lot of, some of it you've got to not do, obviously, but there's no bad, there is no bad suggestion at that point, because it's really starts with a how might versus a we've got to, or we need to, or we should, right? Which is automatic lid on the pot kind of thing. I'm going to move us to the next kind of component, which we'll spend maybe 10 minutes on this, because we've talked a bit about it in this last discussion, but it's really around kind of this architecture component of the 5 A's and really creating a bankable plan. We've talked a bit about, having a tight strategy, being able to understand what those kind of levels, or I call them base camps of growth might be, and preparing for those, shifting and changing, but and the skills and capacity requirements that it takes to move to different levels. But, you've had tremendous success at Open Hand and Youth Villages in terms of growth. So want to talk a little bit about this architecture. I'm wondering if you can provide, very short, maybe 5 minutes per, kind of a short history of the growth plan and milestones that you've had along the way. What were you anticipating? Were there any sort of internal reshaping needs in terms of those base camps, in terms of how you needed to work internally to support this growth? So maybe, I know that's a big, broad question, but maybe thinking and helping people understand, how were you shaping this strategy? How did you sort of see it rolling out? And then what was the actual reality of that? Matt, maybe starting with you.
Sure. When we set on this path to become the preferred provider of medically tailored meals in Georgia, we said, well, that means we're going to go beyond Metro Atlanta. We're going to become a statewide organization. That's going to be a heavy lift. What are we going to need? And one of the very first things that we knew we were going to need is more space. We launched a capital campaign 12 years ago, 11 years ago. Went from 17,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet. Bought all kind of different equipment. So that was the first really big hurdle that we knew was absolutely critical. And we're actually about to do it again. We're going to move our campus to a much bigger facility in order to prepare for statewide growth. The technology piece was, I talked a little bit about that. That was also a really, really heavy lift. We had 8 ordering systems, and every ordering platform was different. It would all go back into the food service operations, and they were responsible for consolidating 8 different platforms every day and putting in an Excel spreadsheet just to plan the operations for that day. With a terribly inefficient. So we had to make huge investments in technology to automate what we needed to do. And then there was talent. That's different than architecture, but in our case, I think it was part of it, because we knew that we needed certain pieces to complement, to leverage our new technology. So as an example, there was a revenue stream out there through Medicare. We needed to become a licensed Medicare provider. That took 3 years on it itself. Just the application process is a bear. But it created a revenue stream, and it leveraged the technology that we built in order to be able to bill Medicare for our services. What else in terms of architecture? More vehicles, and understanding when is it more efficient to ship meals versus deliver them in a refrigerated vehicle. Really understanding.
I remember us talking about that during the midst of COVID too, where it was hard to get volunteers to deliver those meals, right?
You bet. And then the whole shipping component. We knew that if we were going to become a statewide organization, as we are today, we have a health plan contract, and we are now shipping. Well, shipping is a whole new. It required infrastructure, technology for sure, different kind of talent. It challenged us to figure out when was it more efficient to ship versus deliver a meal in our refrigerated vehicle all the way to Macon, Georgia. And so we know our geographic boundaries of, if it's this far, it's better to ship, more cost effective. But if it's this far, a little bit closer in, then we can use our refrigerated vehicles. So getting smarter about the unit cost, the cost to do our business, and then what kind of infrastructure would be needed in architecture to keep costs down, to make sure that this remains sustainable.
Got it. Thank you for that, Tanya.
Yes. So I think for our sort of strategic plan and the process that we've taken, obviously we would love to be in every state here in the country, because every state has children in foster care. And so how is it that we can work with those child welfare systems and Medicaid, care management organizations to not just fund kids transitioning out of foster care into places of permanency, but how do we really be more progressive and prevent children from coming into foster care altogether? More of that permanency work. And so while, as an example, our 5-year plan, which we set course in 2018, was really about, let's start serving more than 30,000 children across the nation, and then your specific number by the state. How is it that we can be more transformative by providing support and advocacy to local child welfare agencies that, need to look at their numbers and conceptualize the why behind their numbers in a very different way? And then how is it that we serve young people who are aging out of foster care that continues to be underserved in a lot of different ways, and onboard an appropriate process to do that? So while we have spent time focusing equally as much on advocacy at the federal level to achieve some of those goals, any sort of federal activity that's associated with Medicaid expansion, with child welfare systems and kind of federal guidelines, and that trickles down to the states. And so when there are flexibilities that come down from the federal level, how are each of the state levels optimizing those things? And can we give them some ideas about how to do that? We have had to diversify how and when we serve young people. So is it just about the children? If you have a high number of 12,000 kids in foster care, is it just about serving those that are in foster care and moving them into permanency, or equally or more advocating with child welfare systems to allow us the opportunity to begin serving them when they're beginning to, get on the radar for child welfare agencies, and thus then running the risk of coming into foster care? And how is it that we can show the evidence that our models for community-based programs really have that evidence? And so we have had to not just do advocacy and working with funding sources and agencies to conceptualize how they can do better by their members, but there was also a moment where we realized and recognized that we probably needed to vet our models even more than saying, here are our outcomes and we generate these outcomes internally. We began to embark on research studies and clinical trials that were completed by independent research organizations, one for our LifeSet program to vet the outcomes, and the continuation of those outcomes as we continue to implement it in other states and programs. And the same for our Intercept program is how is it that we work with an independent research agency to vet the outcomes and the sustainability, whether it's doing the reunification work or the prevention work for children that are coming into foster care or rising to the attention of different state agencies. So doing some of the research, getting the outcomes, vetting the outcomes has been instrumental, because we have seen where more states have been willing to have conversations, because again, there's the evidence of the quality and the outcomes of the models that we utilize. In addition to that, I think we had to recognize that there are some states that have really good providers and maybe not the best model for long-term outcomes. And so we opened ourselves up to do partnerships, and that was new for us as an organization. It was always, we're gonna, go into states, we're gonna learn their pain points, we're gonna move forward. But then there were some states that say, we've got some good providers that just don't have the best models. And so we began to say, let's do some strategic partnerships. So here are our models. Are there some private agencies that are interested in onboarding the models? And so we can help you with that. Are there some state agencies, child welfare systems that are interested in onboarding the model because their staff have the capacity and the potential and the skills to be able to do it? And then how do we help them with that process of onboarding our models? And so strategic partnership has been instrumental in our growth across the country, but beyond the growth, it has been instrumental in us impacting and touching more lives, which is really what the work is all about, whether we do it ourselves or whether we work with partners to implement it wherever our presence happens to be.
It's interesting because you do really different things, but if you really dig out underneath the hood, there's a lot of commonality between kind of the underlying strategy. You're looking, Tanya, at where the stream of children are coming into or potentially coming into, and Matt, again, stream of need in terms of medically prescribed meals, right? It's not always folks with who are, I'm putting my finger quotes up, poor, but it's folks who are in need because they have a medical diagnosis. Then you're looking at the system itself in terms of where can I be actually a plug-in, a service, to this system as a whole. And Tanya, you're talking about, the different states and what's feeding their problem, right? It might be their own internal process or a gap in their process or the gap in their services, and you're filling that. And Matt, the same with medical providers. And then you're really talking about kind of at the top, understanding the system, the system that is your payer market, right? And it's an array of governmental sources that would pay for a certain service, right? And either getting that out of your way or tapping into something that you didn't know about at first. So there's like these layers of commonality here in both of your growth stories, which I find very interesting. That there's something I want to dig into after this around that, but there's definitely some very similar commonalities. What I want to talk about next is just kind of exploring your specific leadership role in sustaining these efforts. If we look at those 5 A's again, I'm just going to lightly touch the fourth is around acting. And so often, from a leadership perspective, and Matt, you talked about this, and Tanya, you have as well, in terms of this is a long-term game, right? This is over many, many years, and it's very stressful at times. There can be extremely lean times when you feel like, oh my gosh, how will I even stay in business, much less get to the next level, right?
Right.
And so, talk to me as a leader about how you kind of keep your eyes on the prize over a long horizon, sort of setting those targets and communicating those at various levels and reinforcing those choices. You've got to deal with your board, you've got to deal with your leadership team, and you got to deal with just the rank and file staff. And then there's an array of stakeholders out there, but you also have to deal with yourself. And there's times that it's just really tough. So I wonder if y'all could help address that. Tanya, you want to start out?
Sure. I think the first thing that I tend to think about all the time, and I always say to my team, just go on the roller coaster ride with me, is who's not being served? Where are the missed opportunities? Because the young people and the families that are not being served are the ones that we have to do more work to figure out how to serve them, where they are, what their needs are, and how we can really raise the level of visibility to who's not being served and then get the support. And so, as I mentioned earlier, general psych for, residential services is pretty common, but who's not being served? It's the 13-year-old girl that's pregnant and has been exploited and is currently in a hotel. Who's not being served? It, maybe those youth who identify as being transgender, but you haven't done your program transition to serve them well, with humility, with compassion, and in an inclusive community. Who's not being served? It could be the 10-year-old that has challenges with being a brittle diabetic, but what people see are the behaviors, not understanding that sometimes it is a medical condition that drives the behaviors, and how do we bring stability? And so we start that as the roller coaster ride of who's not being served and how do we serve them? How do we get there? Because we want to impact as many lives as we can over time and do that successfully. And so as we start down this road of who's not being served, then how do we serve them? How do we create that visibility? But how do we do it well? Because it's one thing to go on a journey and you're doing a terrible job at it. And we want to go on this journey, but we do want to self-assess often, weekly, monthly, quarterly. Are we getting the results that we hold ourselves accountable to getting? Not just while they're in services, but when they're transitioning out of services successfully, are those results being sustained in a healthy and an effective manner? And so as we're looking at and we're doing that self-evaluation, what it creates an opportunity for is that you then can share that back with those external stakeholders. And so anytime we're embarking on a new population or a new catchment area, I am able to take those results regularly. So I have monthly meetings with the Department of Family and Children's Services. I have monthly meetings with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities. anybody that are our stakeholders, we have monthly meetings with them to say, here's what's happened over the last month. Here have been the successes and the challenges. And by the way, here's a success story. We end every meeting with a success story so that we can relate a life with what we're looking at on paper. And it is those aha moments. And now people are, if I miss a month without a success story, people are asking me about the success story. And so being able to kind of bridge that gap of not just the analytics and how we are ramping up and onboarding, but hear how lives are being impacted. And these are real people. These are real children and real families with real challenges. But we are stepping up to be able to meet those needs. And so when I'm going out to talk with foundations in the philanthropic community, when I am going out to talk to insurance companies about presenting our programs and having them to consider how our programs may be able to meet their gaps in services or their pain points, there are things that are relatable that we can share with them. And that has been helpful, not just in sort of knowing, where we're going and why, but convincing other people or creating the right appetite for them to buy into that vision and want to be a part of those successes equally as much. And it's been super effective, not just locally, but also nationally.
Right. So grounding in that mission, those mission moments is what I call it. Sort of bring it.
Absolutely.
It does help as a leader, right? Sometimes you're so worried about like what, if the financials or this or that. It's just like you just need to attach again. We're, back to the roots, right? Matt, any feedback on what it takes to stay attached?
I would echo what Tanya said and what you said, Karen, that those mission moments, we actually will bring clients in to talk to staff at staff meetings and share their story. We will bring caregivers in who are grateful. We get thank you letters all the time from some of them are really heartfelt, and people talk about their health improvement and how they were so glad they graduated to the open hand way of doing things. And so we share those letters all the time to try and always remind people about what our impact is. We have a great impact statement that we create every 6 months. We have dashboard report that we review with the leadership team to look at various impact that we're having. So I think that's so important. I also think while it's my job to communicate the vision and keep the vision in front of staff and board and donors and volunteers at all times, I'm trying to be intentional about sharing authority and sharing engagement and sharing the spotlight. I want my leaders and other staff to be as motivated as I am. And if Congressman, calls me and wants to learn more about medically tailored meals, I bring in my senior leadership team members on those meetings. Or if I'm going up to Washington, D.C., I bring staff with me so that they're part of something larger, right? I encourage them to engage with their peers in the Food is Medicine Coalition. I want my director of development communicating with all the other director of developments at those agencies across the country so that they realize they're part of something bigger, right? And hopefully that helps them to stay motivated. And then finally, I would say just for me, self-care, because there are those times when self-doubt begins to creep in, or maybe a little bit of exhaustion because this has been a long haul. Being intentional about finding other CEOs to talk with. And so I am part of a CEO group of not-for-profit leaders that I meet with every once in a while. And we share success stories, but we bitch and moan to each other all the time. And it's just helpful. And then the CEOs of the agencies in the Food is Medicine Coalition, I'm on a call with them every 2 weeks, and it's a great support system. We learn from each other. We're sharing best practices, and we motivate each other. We inspire each other, and so I've been very intentional about that and grateful for it too.
I love that.
And I will say that
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Karen. I was just going to echo, and I will say that for any nonprofit, and especially when you're thinking, I consider what Matt and I are talking about whole health, right? It's just a different perspective of whole health. being a part of those networks and trade associations is so vital. Not just for, I think, the camaraderie and the support system, but being able to band together when there is a time to advocate for, change or funding or mindsets makes a world of a difference. And at times you can move the needle faster because it is true that there is strength in numbers. And there are lots of opportunities to information share so that you don't reinvent wheels. And you don't always have to encounter the same barriers because there are more than likely 2 or 3 other people that have already gone through it. And I talked earlier about transparency. I'm a part of some really good groups, Together Georgia, and GATS, which stands for the Georgia Alliance of Therapeutic Service Providers. Just the robust diversity and the experience and the support is super important as you kind of move the needle and fulfill your mission. So I definitely want to encourage people to make sure that you're looking into those networks and those trade associations and get connected with those folks.
Thank you for that. And just to kind of maybe put a cherry on the top of that, you're both talking about these internal networks. Creating almost, Matt, you articulate almost creating this network of influencers because you've shared authority, shared the vision, shared, the external relationships, and they bring it back into the organization and they're even more forceful in their advocacy around, the change. But then all this really important aspect of looking externally and finding those networks, leading in those networks, contributing, but also taking those contributions into your model and using the power of the network in order to sustain you as you move forward, but also inspire, right? There's a lot of inspiration in those groups. So appreciate that. With that, I want to thank you both for that feedback. We have a few more minutes, and I did want to open it up for questions from our cohort here around the subject matter of leading change and leading growth in an organization. So I would invite our cohort to unmute and ask questions. We have about 10 minutes now. And then we also have, of course, our Ask the Expert session. So if you're shy, you can always join us in our open hour and ask questions. So just feel free to unmute and ask questions.